so there will be no confusion. Welcome to the candidate. What am I doing now? Besides holding up my iPhone, I'm turning it off, right? Could we all replicate that behavior? Thank you, so there would be no disturbances, including the people on the phone, please. Thank you very much. And before we begin, it has been a request of our candidate that we have a welcome to the traditional territory, and I would ask Mildred Roberts if she could come forward, who's matriarch from Kingston, to provide that particular greeting.
Good morning. I'm happy to see you all here. And I'd just like to welcome you on a part of Kitsim-Kalem territory, the Wolf tribe, and the person that usually does it isn't here, so I was asked to do it. And the other thing that Marianne asked me to open in prayer, and I do that in my language, and I just wish God the best, and I'll be able to sit in and listen to you. So you have to do your very best. Why, says my doctor. We'll get them some oil, some lachag. Het oorzaak de maar een kleine kwa. Het oorzaak de verlieste kwa het vrouw die is niet installeren willen wel zo leuk ze gedenken. En dat niet in de mom aan de molaya gedenken de panotte aan de paplihakske aan de galtjekke. En de panotte aan de molawalspa. And the Multidisciplinary Leadership. And the West Coast audit and amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Laval's committee is chaired by two faculty members, Dr. Linda O'Neill and Dr. John Sherry. And at this point in time, I will ask Dr. Sherry if he would introduce the members of the examining committee.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for coming to support Bob and to celebrate today. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Bruce Goodgood for chairing this defense. It's a very busy time of the year, so thank you, Bruce. We have from New Jersey City University, Dr. Terrace Nelson. She's an associate professor there. She was psychodynamically trained, which includes Jung's work, and has a particular interest in health psychology and mindfulness. The outside committee member is Dr. Jeff Bruniak, who's a professor from Athabasca University, who takes a holistic approach in teaching, experiential approach, and planted the seed for Bob. Bob was taking a class with him in transformative learning, I believe, and just planted the seed. And Jeff has been really instrumental in helping us. Probably went beyond the work of an external member, just really gave us wonderful feedback and was very helpful in moving us along. And then we have Dr. Linda O'Neill, who is a colleague in the School of Education and the counseling program, is also coordinator of the regional programs, coordinator of Community Care Center, and is the Buddha of qualitative research. Probably doing research on a mountain right now in the Yukon. And welcome. Welcome, Linda, Patrice, and Jeff. Can you hear us okay?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And finally, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here and supporting Bob and Marion, who's been they graduate together. You know, when you go to the program, your partner goes up there. Actually, your partner should go up there to grab the diploma because they're so much part of this process. So, thank you. Marion is a good friend and colleague here at UMBC. And without any further ado, I can move on, right?
Certainly.
Right, okay. Introduce Bob. I first met Bob here in this room, actually. I was teaching a group therapy class, and Bob was the student assist. And I'm like the ambulance chaser of groups. You know, I love groups. I live it. I love it. I eat it. And then I started talking to Bob, and he's like, "Oh, you like group? I like group." And we started connecting right away. And I think by the end of the day, you were a presenter in the class, and he was sharing his experience. We just connected right away. And I think a few weeks, and I was thinking about this morning. A few weeks after that, he invited me up to his place, and we were like, you know, it just brought me back to my childhood. I grew up. Well, I spent the last 18 years in the city, but I grew up in Parsippany, New Jersey, which is a little, it's not as remote as here, but it's remote. And we were like kids playing. Like he showed me, like if you have a deranged hen, you have to separate it from the other hens, and you have to cut wood way in advance. You have like I think enough for 3 years or something. And then we went to this old beat-up truck. Remember this? And you said, oh look, you can jump start it. And he put these two wires together, right on his ass, right on his ass. And we got right out, and he showed me other stuff. We had just a great day. And I was thinking, well, that's a great metaphor for this process. And working with Bob, he doesn't necessarily ever fall right on his ass. You know, he was just always going along, and he just kept on going with such passion. And it was such a pleasure to kind of be part of this process, Bob. So I really appreciate that. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest of honor.
I'm just going to do a bit of an overview. I didn't expect to have such a wonderful autobiographical.
I
don't know what I'm going to do to top that. I'll go over the rules. How's that? Thanks very much, John, for stealing my thunder.
Oh yeah, we missed that part, didn't we?
Just briefly for people, it's nice to see so many people here who are graduate students who will be defending themselves in the next little while. So do an overview of the process. We have, as I said, the introduction of the candidate and then the examining committee. Then I do an overview of the process. Bob will, first of all, not like me very much because he has an opportunity to present for 20 to 25 minutes. I told him it was 20 minutes earlier in the week. So he's been working at getting it down under 20 minutes, not knowing that he actually has a greater amount of time. So you'll undoubtedly be able to accomplish that particular goal. At that point in time, there will be rounds of questioning from the examining committee, beginning with the external, and then moving to, I'm going to go with the departmental person, and then finishing with the two chairs. Do you want to flip a coin? Who wants to go last?
I'll go last. Okay, good.
And then Linda, and then John.
She'll beat me up when she sees me.
Characteristically, we go through 2 rounds of questioning. Each examiner asks a question and has an opportunity for relevant follow-up on the same question, not asking a different question. And we go through 2 rounds of questioning, at which point in time I will query the examining committee whether they would like to proceed with the third. A third is permissible. And at that point in time, we can proceed with the third examination if the members of the committee deem it useful.
Okay.
And then finally, it can be opened up to questions for my part in terms of the chair, as well as members of the audience. And I would ask that you show some compassion to Bob, who will at this point in time have probably lost several psychic pounds. And then, without any further ado, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the folks on the phone. Linda, it's good to connect with you again.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, and Jeff as well. And Dr. Nelson, let's get to know you, I guess, as the day goes on here.
Absolutely. Patrice is fine.
Okay, thank you. I'll just start right away because my 20 minutes is ticking, right?
It is now.
So my topic is making sense of synchronicity. What I've done is I've embedded a next slide statement for the folks on the phone, so they'll know when I'm advancing by slides. So. Next slide. There, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a story of synchronicity. This is a story of a German woman who wanted to take a picture of her little son with a camera like this in 1914, took the picture, and then took the film in to get developed in Strasbourg, France. Before she had a chance to pick it up, World War I was declared, so she couldn't go back into France. 2 years later, she was in Frankfurt. She, by then, had a little girl and decided to take a picture of her little girl, which she did, got it developed in Frankfurt, and when it came back, it was double exposed. So if you know old film, you have the first shot you took in the back, and then the front, you have the shot you just took. And what was in the back was the picture of her son from 2 years earlier that she had dropped off in Strasbourg. Now, the chances of that happening are very, very, it's very remote that that possibility could happen. It's far beyond random in my mind. And the other aspect of it, for her, had that film come back to me, it would have been, oh, it's double exposed, I got ripped off. But for her, it was her son. It was very meaningful, which leads us to the definition of synchronicity. By Carl Jung himself, who who brought up the definition around the 1920s, 1930s, and published it in '52. So synchronicity is the random occurrence of events related only by meaning assigned by the observer. Right? So you've got random events, and it means something to you. And I like this one. I just ran into it a few weeks ago. A Conspiracy of Improbabilities, right, by Deepak Chopra. I'm going to go. There you go. I'm going to go over the background, literature review, methodology, findings, conclusions, implications. Those are the main points I'll be covering in my presentation.
Next slide.
So background to the topic, I originally was looking at doing a thesis on vision and leadership. And as I started my literature review, I ran into this book, Synchronicity, The Inner Path of Leadership, by Joseph Jaworski. It stopped me in my tracks. It turned me around, and I started focusing on synchronicity.
Next slide.
At this point, the process was one of being a neophyte, not having done any research before. I wanted to undertake the mega thesis of the world, right? Come up with something that obviously had a scope that even a dissertation wouldn't manage. So I broke it down to synchronicity in leadership. And with Linda's hint, she suggested, well, how about focusing on experience? I looked at that for a moment, and I thought, that would be great. And then I started thinking of looking at the experience of synchronicity of eminent leaders that I might be able to interview. And again, I got another little nudge of, what about talking to the mainstream person? And it fit like a glove, because synchronicity is a universal experience, and it's not replicable, right, in a laboratory. And so, also I was invited to not drive the research, which really set the tone for synchronicity. It allowed things to come into it. So I really appreciate these nudges that I got, and actually led to a very manageable inquiry for me.
Next slide.
What is the significance? Why do I consider this research important? Well, synchronicity is considered by quantum physicists as the spanner in the works. Another expression they use is the flaw in the fabric. Another one is the joker in the deck of cards. That means that in terms of, for us who are being steeped in Western worldview of cause and effect, more mechanistic, reductionist kind of approach, along comes synchronicity that totally defies all of that. We do a double take. There are other views of reality for which synchronicity does not create any sense of shock or awe or surprise or huge mystery. Quantum physics, for example, I call that a worldview right now because it's not directly related to the mainstream still. And the Aboriginal worldview, other peoples, Aboriginal in particular, but also the Chinese. Carl Jung did a lot of work with studying the Chinese way, in particular the I Ching. The experience is universal. It's like it's available to everyone. Everyone can. I mean, there are some people who don't believe in synchronicity. They don't believe in. They think everything is random, but it is possible to interpret it. This research also gives voice to the common person, and there's a lot that's been written about synchronicity. but there's not a lot that's been said about the experience of synchronicity, and in particular for the common person. I only found one other thesis and no articles. It's not well researched.
Next slide.
So this took me to the research question. It boiled it down, and this became the pivot point of my inquiry. What is the experience of synchronicity for the common person?
Next slide.
Literature review. This is the first part of the process. I fell in love with the literature review. I had all these fears from what other people had warned me about the literature review, but it became the most interesting part for me because one thing led to another thing. It was like I don't know, some kind of search for goodies. You know, it's like more and more surprises kept surfacing. And so everything I read in that I organized under the themes here, or under the main topics. They seem to congregate into different areas. And the areas were looking at worldviews in synchronicity, the role of Carl Jung. There's a lot written on Carl Jung. Synchronicity in leadership, not that much, but it's really potent. Characteristics of synchronicity, interconnectedness came up quite consistently. And I'm going to change the slide now.
Next slide.
To look at the last one, synchronicity in science. These are 4 quantum physicists that are directly or indirectly involved in the discussion of synchronicity. Wolfgang Pauli was a physicist who received the Nobel Peace Prize, worked hand in hand with Carl Jung in coming up with that definition. This is David Bohm, who wrote Implicate Order. He's quite known, well known. Worked with David Peake. He's the one that set Joseph Jaworski, the fellow who wrote the Synchronicity book, on his track of experiences. David Peake wrote a book. He's a physicist as well. Wrote a book called Synchronicity: Bridge Between Mind and Matter. And just a couple weeks ago, I just stumbled on this man, Francois Martin, who is considered, is portrayed as a hardcore physicist. In other words, synchronicity, don't bother me with that. He's actually been so-called converted. They've done a documentary on him called Synchronicity, telling his story. So quantum physics is quite taken by this process.
Next slide.
Okay, my methodology. I'm going to look at these different areas of it: qualitative research, thematic analysis, my participant selection, my interviews, and my data analysis.
Next slide.
Qualitative research. One of the reasons I opted for qualitative versus quantitative is that synchronicity, as being seen as the flaw in the fabric, meaning it's the one thing that sort of puts into question the Western view of causality. I didn't want to use a method which, to me, in my eyes, seemed to just only view the world in that way, which is quantitative. I didn't have a need to generalize. That's not what I was wanting to do. It certainly fits my research question. I can say a bit more about that later. It's non-replicable. It's how do you do a quantitative study of something that you can't set the conditions for it to occur? It occurs when it occurs and how it occurs, and to the people it wants to occur, sort of, so to speak. I also wanted to be open to surprises. I just didn't want to get information on what I specifically identified as the points I wanted information. I wanted to see what are the main points? What is it that comes out around synchronicity? And I love the reflexive component that's involved in the qualitative, like the journal.
Next slide.
Thematic analysis. My choice of methodology. It was suggested to me, and then I explored it, and as I was looking at different kinds, and being new to inquiry, being new to qualitative research, I really wasn't quite sure. Thematic analysis actually got very clear to me in my mind as I was getting ready for the defense. I have my reasons for using it, but it got a lot clearer. It draws out the patterns. That's all I wanted. I wanted to draw out the patterns. What are the similar points? I didn't want to focus on anything particular. And regarding the experience, the explanations of the participants, and their observations. It expands the fields of unknowns. I wanted to see what surprises might come from what they had to share.
Next slide.
My participant selection, my sampling for the inquiry had two approaches. Purposive means simply I had a condition. I had a condition. The condition was that they believe in synchronicity. I didn't want to have to argue with someone about what, is this synchronicity or not. I wanted people who were like, yeah, can I tell you about my story of synchronicity? And accidental, the process I used was, I simply talked to people as I met them when I felt moved to, and said, I'm looking for participants. And out of that, 2 came forward. And from those 2, 2 more came forward. So that's to a total of 4.
Next slide.
Interviews. This is the second part of the process that I really loved, was the interviews. We did them here on campus, about an hour, and they're what they call semi-structured. I had 3 core questions. I mean, in my thesis, I've got them all laid out a little more well written than that. But this is to sum it up. You have a story about it. What's it like to experience synchronicity, and how do you explain it?
Next slide.
And for the data analysis, I developed a code book in which I kept my transcripts and the coding. I isolated the questions that I actually asked. Those are the questions I started from, and then proceeded to whatever other questions came from the conversation. And then I started writing up my codes, which are little summary statements. I organized my codes in a table, gave them a description, identified them where they were located, identified them to the question, and then started developing themes.
Next slide.
I originally came up with about 22 themes, and I distilled them down to 15, and then I down to this group, and then ultimately over there. These numbers represent the number of codes that seem to group, have similarities. And so these are the ones, this is not really a theme, unique comments. These are comments that didn't fit anywhere. I thought I'd put them in there. And then once I had these themes, I set them up in categories. And it came to 3 categories, telling me something about synchronicity, something about worldview, and the experience of synchronicity. And I'll go and look at it in more detail.
Next slide.
What I thought I would do for this presentation is just give you a few quotes of what participants have said and some of the salient points of the findings, so that it'll give you an idea. In terms of what it is, here's a statement. It's basically kind of like the paradox of life, in that things are supposed to happen this way, but we caught them happening in a different way. Traits and characteristics, these are words that were used. Easy, magical, mysterious, a blessing, fun, unpredictable, common, supportive for synchrony. How it happens. Having an open mind helps. Open heart. Having a focus in what you're doing. Commitment. Being in a state of creativity. If you're an artist, for example. How to make it occur. We got into that conversation. Can you set up the conditions for it, right? Yes, if you pay attention. Tuning into the order of things, letting go of control. And particularly like this one, here's what was said. So it's letting go of control of my own desire to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to have it be exactly within my scheme of how the world should work, right? If you let go of trying to control all that, then you create an environment of synchronicity to happen.
Next slide.
In terms of the worldview category, interconnectedness, I like this one here in particular because there was an element of surprise in it for me. The experience of synchronicity has much to do with everything is completely interconnected. Interconnected. There's another word for it, intercausal, like all affect each other. I thought, wow, not only are things connected, but they're affecting each other. What an interesting perspective. It gives you also an insight into some of the depth that we went into in the interviews. Indicators of another reality. Questioning of reality. I believe there's something else. Basically not another world, but another way of looking at what is happening here. So you're getting a gist of what came up in my interviews in terms of how these participants see synchronicity. Enfoldment, which is a quantum physics term, meaning the whole is contained in all of the parts. Every part contains the whole. Reality is, I like this one, is like a net. Where each of the threads net cross, there is a jewel. And if you concentrate on the one jewel, you see one jewel, and you see all the other jewels reflected in the one jewel. This is identified as having some Buddhist influence, but it's still nonetheless one of the perspectives of the participants. Bigger world. I feel that our inner wisdom and our intuitive selves is connected to the natural order and rhythm of the bigger world. And that is the area in which synchronicity happens in our lives. That sense of bigger, right? We're touching on the word spiritual in a sense.
Next slide.
Now, the final category is the experience of synchronicity was seen as positive. I mean, there's more to it, but this sort of sums it up. I just feel so happy, unexpected, stunning, astonishing, shocking, disbelief, lots of words used there. Shock, amazement, awe, reverence, wonder, sense of magic, marvel, bewilderment, being floored. I was floored by the experience. So these are words that the participants used. Excitement. I feel as though it is like those aha moments when things make sense and you're feeling alive with energy, your heart is open, you're, connected. So there's obviously enthusiasm here in sharing this.
Next slide.
My conclusions. This is sort of the primary point that comes out of the thesis for me. There are other conclusions I'll come to in a minute. But I was on the phone with someone, and in the conversation, with my age, I remembered something from the 50s when the perspective of synchronicity at that time was, well, it's just a coincidence. End of story. Or it was an act of God, if you were very religious, right? End of story. But not anymore. So that would be cause and effect perspective on this end of the gradient. On the other end is the world of everything's interconnected, maybe even intercausal, with little or less surprise. So my conclusion is with the data here, my participants are somewhere in the middle of that gradient. There is a shift happening in how we see the world.
Next slide.
For the participants, synchronicity was seen as an opening. In other words, when there's an event that happens like that, it becomes an opportunity to see the world in a different way, as interconnected as all of the elements that came up here that we discussed. They also see it as a pretext to talk about synchronicity, to talk about this other worldview. And they do it in connection to that. Seen as a positive experience, basically, I can say a lot more about that. Affirmation of interconnectedness, a source of healing, holds the potential of healing for relationships, is in one case. And in another case, a point of action, in other words. And this is seen in career studies as well, where synchronistic events, and it confirms, should I go here, should I go there? You get a synchronistic event, and you go there, right? It supports it.
Next slide.
Another conclusion is that the participants saw themselves on the outside of mainstream thinking. Though they didn't want to give it up. They don't want to say, no, that's sort of, if I was to say that, because they use terms like, well, what I'm going to tell you is, you might consider as flaky, weird, hokey, flighty, fuzzy, in the twilight zone, right? These are actual words that they used. But they still, you've seen the depth at which they've gone, right, in their thinking. So there's a shift. One participant at the end said, that's it. I'm no longer going to apologize for how I see the world. I see it as interconnected now. So it did sort of trigger that shift. And regarding predisposition, we've looked at that, I've mentioned it, but that's one of the conclusions. There are some thoughts around predisposition. There is a sense of spirituality, or a sense of being some part of something much bigger, a greater plan, a greater order. The word order in one participant came up a lot, talking of the order of things. And it was a chance to explore. I was quite amazed at the extent to which the interviews were a contribution to the participants. They were not judged, and they could go deeper into the topic, which in most cases you bring it up in a conversation, okay?
Next slide.
You have to let it be. So the main implication is that there is a shift happening. If we were to look this as the crack in the belief system that we have at the mainstream, I think this is where it's going. That's the implication. And that the rift is larger than we may think. And because of that, we can anticipate maybe more action to be supported by this worldview. I want to come back to the popular cultures. You can see it infiltrating in popular culture. The TV series Touch with Kiefer Sutherland, right? This is how this is their promotion for the TV series. A drama that blends science and spirituality to explore the connections with which bind together all of humanity. And then there's a book called Global Shift. I mean, this is reflective of things changing, how a new worldview is transforming humanity. So things are being written in that sense as well, in that direction. My conclusions, the topic is very relevant because there is that shock of cultures. The importance of the experience for the mainstream person, I see that. It's very relevant. It's a rich source of information. There was incredible flow in the process for me, this whole inquiry. And the contribution of the research, I think it's a piece that now helps the shift of worldview. That's how I see it.
Next slide.
Acknowledgements, of course, my participants, my thesis committee here, my wife Marion, my daughter Maggie, who got me going, who believed in me all the way, and I want to acknowledge David Bohm and his implicate order.
Next
My images, and in closing,
Next slide.
a last little story. This man is named Lawrence Anthony, died on March 7th last year, called the Elephant Whisperer. The day he died, 2 herds set into motion, and 2 days later gathered at his home. They came from different directions, and they didn't eat or drink in that time and then left. So a random event, but also a lot of meaning derived from it.
Next
The last definition, add meaning to such a moment of interconnectedness and you have synchronicity.
Next slide.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. What we will do now is we'll take a moment and to entertain some questions. We'll begin with our external. Is it Dr. Dow Nelson?
Yes, this is Dr. Nelson, Patrice here.
You have the floor.
Yes. Hi. Bob?
Hi, Patrice.
Hi. My question is, I'll just begin with sort of a statement premise. The notion of causality is a widespread Western view. Yes, you described in your presentation as mechanistic. Okay? And this, of course, is juxtaposed with the a-causal premise and underpinning of synchronicity. Okay, so the question itself is, can causality and synchronicity coexist at all? And if so, share that with us. What's your thinking?
Well, I think causality and acausality can coexist. I think the difficulty is that causality projects itself as the only way of seeing the world. I think if you were to see the world from an interconnected perspective, it would include causality perspective, not exclude it. Whereas the causality perspective tends to exclude anything that suggests that there is a world beyond the material. And I think that's where quantum physics comes in and starts saying we have physical, solid, material objects that are at the same time vibrational. And there is a space for both to coexist. However, as I mentioned, I believe that the difficulty we run into is that it's been discounted as, well, hokey, flighty, you've got all of the adjectives there, since, Descartes ran into problems with the Catholic Church, right? That's how I see it.
An opportunity for follow-up?
Yes, just a quick follow-up. And could you define what that space would be?
Could I define with what could be?
You mentioned that there's a space between the causality and, a-causality, between causality and synchronicity. Could you define that space that coexists?
I don't know so much if it's a space. If you were to look at it from the quantum physics perspective, It can be in both at the same time. It's connected to the observer. The observer, what they found is that the observer sort of determines what state it goes into. I mean, we're talking about matter here now, but causality, if I wanted to figure out what makes my car or my truck run better, I would definitely approach it from a causality perspective. I mean, we could approach finding parking spaces from both, where you're looking at maybe I'm impacting whether that space is there or not. There seems to be doesn't seem to be that relationship of the observer having such a direct influence on the results of causality when the causality is triggered by another external. Whereas if you approach it from the acausal interconnected perspective and where the observer is playing a role, you see that there is a possibility, you entertain the possibility that you may be impacting what you're encountering.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Bruniak.
Hi, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff. Good to hear you.
Hi there. I had some questions about the preconditions for synchronicity. Can you comment a little bit on what you found to be the preconditions for the people you interviewed? I've got a set of related questions. How necessary did you find these conditions? Why were they necessary? And I have another question about Jaworski when we get to it.
Okay. I don't know if in the interviews we went to that depth of necessity of them. I was very careful at that point of not setting up leading questions, which I was very tempted to do. Let me start by saying that Jaworski, in his book, clearly identifies and states, I don't have the quote at my fingertips, that it was his commitment to his path of developing leadership forums that opened the unfurling of consecutive synchronistic events. For the participants, especially from the participants that were steeped or came from a background of artists, the artist world, where they felt a bigger connection to different things. They felt that having an open heart and an open mind really made a difference. One participant felt that the predisposition was like doing research on the internet, where when you go, you're looking for something that you are already predisposed to what you're going to find, and that you basically you open the door to the unexpected, but you've defined the channel. See, there's two categories. I ran into one author who sets two categories of synchronicity. One is what's called the classic synchronicity. Like the first example I gave would be considered a classic synchronicity. And the other category, which is a catch-all, like you think of someone and that person calls you, is on the phone rings and there's that person, where you're getting into the fringe of the paranormal. So if there's a belief that if you think about something long enough that it will show. One participant really believed that if you met someone for the first time and were taken by that person, that you were setting yourself up. There was a predisposition to spotting that person anytime you were in a group or in the street or walking, or you would be able to identify. You were more predisposed to that. I did find one article on an attempt to do quantitative research on synchronicity, and it had to do with this sense of predisposition with people that you meet. What other predisposition? I think that's pretty well it, Jeff, that I can remember right now.
Well, I understand you were selecting people on the basis of their, their belief in the concept, so that you may not want to have pursued that as part of the research. I was just wondering about that. Now, you, on page 45 of the thesis that I have here, under a heading called Triggering Synchronicity, you have a reference to Jaworski there. And I quote, "It was primarily the book by Jaworski that piqued my interest in the question of whether or not there was a predisposition to frequency of occurrence of the phenomena. This story suggested one of two things. Either he was just a plain lucky guy, or he had unwittingly stumbled on a precondition to the occurrence of the phenomena." I was wondering what did he stumble on? What was that precondition that he stumbled on?
But the only one that comes to mind that he's identified specifically was commitment. He was a lawyer, and he went through a bitter divorce, and he stopped everything that he was doing, and it set him up to make a decision to go into his dream, which was to set something up for leadership, because if he felt the deficiency was there in the United States at that time. And the moment he made that, 2 days after that, he encountered David Bohm. And David Bohm pointed him in the direction after 4 hours with him, which he taped and went over quite consistently after. He then began this sequence of this series of synchronistic events. It's jaw-dropping. I mean, to have half a dozen of those, or even 1 or 2 of those in a lifetime, is quite amazing. It's the only thing that he's been able to identify that I remember in the book was commitment to a path.
Yes, and you mentioned intention as part of that commitment. So
yes.
That's helpful. Thank you. That's what I was wondering about.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. O'Neill.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Linda.
This is a wonderful discussion, and it's going to get better. If we could talk all day, couldn't we, Bob?
Yeah, we could.
No, we couldn't, Linda.
Bruce isn't going to let us. That's the way that guy is working. Okay, but he's surrounded by a bunch of counselors, so he's up against it here. Listen. Oh, I know you're going to be shocked, Bob, but let's go to methodology. I love it.
Okay.
I just love it, Bob. So you have this beautiful quote, when in your chapter on methodology, when you're introducing qualitative research, and it's by Gilgan and Abrams, where you say, you quote them as, "Doing useful qualitative research requires that we make sense of complexity." And as you, this thesis kind of beautifully points out, synchronicity is acknowledged to be such a complex phenomenon. Can you share with us the ways for you that a general qualitative approach has helped you better understand the phenomena? And you have this nice little piece in there where you say, how has a general qualitative approach helped provide you with a clue?
Provide me with a what?
Provide you with a clue.
Oh, clue.
That's the word you use to
Yes.
Understanding it.
Yes. Well, let me see. I think it comes back to the scope, setting the scope of what I wanted to do as to something that I could, if I can use the word from a methodological point of view, contain. And I wanted to, I kept it simple and clear in my mind that all I wanted to do was to bring out additional information about the topic. I wasn't trying to create theory. I wasn't trying to generate, I wasn't trying to bring about change in society. If doing the topic created change, and it did impact the participants and impacted me, that was secondary, but that wasn't the primary objective. I realized that from the books that I had read, I didn't really know much about synchronicity. I knew about its role in counseling with Jung, and I knew to some extent, and I knew about its impact on quantum physics, but it didn't bring me any closer to what it was, especially for people from the Western, who are steeped in Western thinking. And I thought that what a better way to do something that where it's really open-ended and that the complexity can come up. It's like something emerges. It's like systems thinking, right? Where you look at a system and you see that it's self-organized, it's dynamic, it's moving on its own. I wanted something that reflected the dynamic movement that I feel is inherent in synchronicity, that you couldn't do if you had to come up with a Likert scale or some kind of evaluation of frequency of occurrence of it. And I remember, Jeff, you brought up the question of why I didn't mention any reference, whether pseudonym or a name of the participants. Or identify gender or identify any of that. I wanted to keep the focus on the essence, if you wish, without focusing on the essence. To allow things to come up and then to let the similarities sort of group themselves together. I know I brought my own perspective as a researcher. All my readings, I was very biased, obviously, on synchronicity in that way, but I wanted to see what came forward. I wanted to group it. It's like the very topic to me would be, I don't know what the word is, it would be counterproductive to explore synchronicity with its complexity and its broad range and all of its unanswered questions from a place of pinpointing like a laser on one aspect of it. The other aspect that I wanted to do is I simply wanted to bring up topics that would be available for further research that could later on go. And that's why I really appreciate your question, Jeff, when I submitted my thesis about the gender and that is something that could then be explored. We could go look at what's the difference between men and women. Is there a difference? Is there a difference for synchronicity for people, the experience, who are of a different worldview? Someone who does the I Ching every day, or someone that is from an Aboriginal perspective, like I was thinking of Leroy Littlebear and his book and his influence on David Peat and Blackfoot physics. It's like, what would be the impact of synchronicity? So it would open the door to further research, and I think that's one of the rich aspects of what I've uncovered, because there's so little that's shown on the main themes, the salient points that come up for people. And I don't think it matters whether you're a quantum physicist or whether you're, a truck driver, train driver, or a farmer like I, grew up as. Synchronicities still happens in the same way. There's coincidences, or Joseph Jaworski for that matter. I don't know if this directly answers your question, but it's certainly why I lean to that, and why I went to thematic analysis. Obviously follows on, it's a natural, like a tree leaning in that direction, follows onto thematic analysis.
Whether it answered my question or not, it was awesome, Bob. It was awesome. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
You want to follow that up, Dr. Sher?
Linda, you're a riot. Bob, well, first of all, thanks for the wonderful presentation, and for me, maybe probably for most of us, it's more than an intellectual discovery with you. I could feel it, and we probably all have our own stories around synchronicity that we can identify with and relate to. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your own movement, your own transformation, go through this experience as a researcher, what happened to you? What did you gain? What did you learn? How were you transformed?
Wow. Well, to put what happened to me, I need to put it in context. In 1969, I did a pre-master's year. In those days, I was encouraged to do this year as a preparation before doing my master's. And I became so disenchanted with the academic world that I dropped everything and walked away. I never went back and resisted it till 3 years ago. And so the transformation that occurred, I think, was I dropped a lot of judgments that I have about the academic world and the university world. It became it's like I realized that what I was doing was shutting out from my world a lot of people who had a lot of good things to offer, even though they didn't see the world the same way as I did. I guess the example, and I gave you this example once when we were chatting, is it would be like never wanting to learn English because I don't like it, right? And yet English is not my language. And even though I've learned English, I can communicate and navigate amongst people that speak English. But all that time, I'm French, right? My thinking is French. My philosophy is French. I haven't given up my joie de vivre or my appreciation of things from that way. And what I discovered is that I could learn by doing this. It would force me to learn to navigate within the academic world and develop relationships with people from a hard place, and at the same time be able to communicate within the framework in which that world operates, and at no time give up how I see the world from a different perspective, which is heavily influenced by my Aboriginal involvement and ceremonies in that. So that is one huge impact. I think another impact is that it's demystified this whole process for me. It's also a mystery. There's something about like the defense, just getting ready for the defense itself, which seems so dreaded, but at the same time forced a level of clarity for me on what I did, why I did it, trying to get to a depth of it over just even discussing it with different people at different times, that will stay with me for a long time, independent of my topic and independent of what I do with this. It's opened the possibility of maybe even looking at a PhD at some point. I laugh because, I've with all my judgments, right? That's a thing. What was neat is that, and I've appreciated your influence on this in particular, Linda, is I've met people who actually share a lot of this alternate worldview that I move with, right? Like not driving something, not controlling it to the point of killing it, allowing something to evolve. And I think I discovered that the research availabilities are very exciting. I mean, when I left, we were looking at microchips, microfiche rather, within a small library of the small campus that I was in as what was available to use as reference, right? So I have a much better understanding. I think that's one of the big transformations in me, and much more tolerance for academics.
Thanks for that. Do you care to follow that?
I'm glad you're not holding back, Bob.
Yeah, that was
I
great.
think that was a wise comment, Bob, in the thesis defense.
Thanks for that. We'll return to Dr. Downelson.
I just loved your response, Bob. I not only loved it, I was very moved by it. I was very moved by the way you described your transformation. I guess in there you described what this meant to you, And so just to circle back, it's some ways to finding that space between, I guess, however we've grown up in terms of Western thinking, and my own attraction to a sense of interbeing. My sense is that what we bring to this is a search for meaning. And for our patients, since certainly I'm more clinically inclined, meaning is at the heart of what patients are looking for. So my question to you is, in addition to finding meaning, in addition to whatever other clinical applications there might be, is there anything else that you can add to how we can apply synchronicity to our work with our patients?
Wow. In my readings, and this was after I finished, actually, I submitted my thesis, I ran into Dr. Brightman, a psychologist in the States that has written a lot on synchronicity and healing. He, well, Jung, obviously, with the story of the scarab beetle and that from his patient's dream, associates that. But I found Dr. Brightman's work, or what he'd written, refreshing in that he speaks of how, that from a synchronistic perspective, the issues that how do you put it, the patients walk in with his issues. In other words, if he has an issue that he's focusing on in his life, the synchronistic aspect is that a patient comes in with the same issue, different context, different personalities, different stage, but same core issue. So there's a correlation of synchronicity, and he's done quite a bit of writing to explore that. I haven't gone into the depths of what he's had to say, but it connects with my background and training as a ceremonial person. We're trained to see that everything we experience before the happening of an event is connected to what we're going to encounter in that event. And how can we best read that to prepare for the event? Whether it's a ceremony or whether it's a healing or whatever is, that someone has brought us tobacco for or has made a request for. So there is that connection of what we might want to call synchronicity. But that's where synchronicity now starts sliding into the area that you mentioned, the interconnectedness, or how we're interconnected with everyone, and how there is no time and space. I mean, this is something too, we call it synchronicity, would suggest that these events happen at the same time. There's a connection of sin, the word sin meaning juxtaposed in time. But some of these events happen at different times over time, right? And so, but that's not the point, is if you look at synchronicity, the interconnectedness is not just connecting of different points and events, it's connecting over time, past, present, and future. So I find that whole area of working with people and working with groups, and this is where John and I met, quite fascinating, which then leads us to the importance of the practitioner working on themselves so that you can develop a sensitivity beyond your reactive patterns, a sensitivity to the patterns that are emerging in the space. And then this takes us into new leadership, where the focus of new leadership by Peter Senge and particularly Otto Scharmer are proposing theory U in leadership, where you drop everything you know. You don't look back to extrapolate from what's happened, what's going to come. What you do is you drop everything you know and you turn within. And you learn to read what is coming that way. I mean, I could say a lot more because I'm really quite impassioned by the whole leadership perspective. So I hope this addresses some of your question.
It certainly does, yes. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks, Patrice.
Thank you. Dr. Brunier.
Hi, I'm following up on Patrice's question in a slightly different way. Bob, at one point in your thesis, you were talking about meaning of synchronicity in terms of maybe the message that it might be sending, that you could look at it that way, or as a sign. I wondered if you had been able to find out from your participants what kind of message they were taking from their interpretation of the synchronistic event happening to them, and what they did in relation to that, and then what happened. Did you have any experience with that?
Yes, yes. One very obvious one, and that's the point that I brought up in the slide. I did talk about it. Is this person was in a position of making a decision about whether to join an organization. And then that day, somebody came to the house and brought some articles that were connected to something from her past that she hadn't experienced in a long time, and was connected to the issue that she was debating in her mind. I'm making a point of talking around it, because I live in a small community here, and I don't really want my participants to be identified. And so that the connection between the object that was brought from another country at a different time relating to an experience that was directly connected to the decision that she had made was interpreted by her as a confirmation that she should go ahead and join the organization. That's one example. Another example of a person looking at buying a house, that the person just totally loved this house, and again a synchronistic series of events unfolded in which she ended up deciding to buy the house, even though financially it didn't work at all. It all ended up working out for her. So that's like a follow-up for her. And also in the first case, she confirmed that had been the right decision for her. So there was a connection in her mind between the suggestion that maybe she should go in that direction in her interpretation and the actual result, and the same in the second case. Those were the only two cases of actual decisions. And I know there's quite a bit of writing in terms of how synchronicity has played a role in people making a choice in their careers, for example. I'll leave it at that, Jeff.
Sure. So it sounds like a decision point is kind of how you were seeing it being used.
Yeah, but they specifically identified it as a decision point.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. O'Neill.
Hey, Bob, I'm back.
Great.
Let's talk methodology. Okay. Okay, just building a little bit, Bob, on what you started to address in my previous question. Like on page 2930, you do a nice job of going into depth and providing examples of, several other qualitative methods that might have fit this particular exploration, including grounded theory and phenomenology. But you wisely chose, as you very carefully pointed out in my previous question, to go with a more simple structure of thematic analysis, right?
Yes.
But based on what you've learned in this study, for future research on synchronicity, do you believe there's a place for either grounded theory or phenomenology? And if not, just share that with us. But if so, what do you think that might look like?
Wow. I say wow because I don't know that much about phenomenology and grounded theory other than, some general points. I wish I could have gone into the depth that I have with thematic analysis. But I can say this, I think from right now, if I were to ask to approach that from either of those two, I would go for phenomenology. And I would actually, I'm not sure what method, how I would use phenomenology or how I would approach it, but I would want to go for the essence. I would want to see if I could find out more about what it is. And I think what it might uncover is that the looking for the essence is not necessarily what needs to be sought after. I mean, it sounds like a contradiction, but it's almost like it needs to be unveiled, that if you go deeper into synchronicity and its interconnectedness, and if you go and look at how it fits into other worldviews, and how in other worldviews it's not that big a deal. It's not a surprising element. That it would uncover, especially if we did this phenomenology or this looking for the essence within a group of a target group that was of Western thinking again, it might lead again and might reinforce this other aspect. Grounded theory, it's a difficult topic to approach, even looking for theory on it. I mean, I think that David Pete and Jung and these writers have come up with about as much as they can in terms of theory, but it's more like synchronicity. I guess I'm struggling here because we're trying to isolate something that when seen in a context of where it really is, like this other worldview, it sort of fades out. I mean, and I think that I ran into one author, he wrote Reason, he said, he sees that the Western perspective approach to inquiry has seen its useful days, its useful life is coming to an end because of this shift in worldview. I mean, what kind of methodology could we use that is open-ended to discovering new things about it, but without nailing it to the wall in such a way, from a perspective that we use now, that actually takes it out of its context? That's where I'm torn, Linda.
Beautiful, Bob. You nailed it.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Dr. Terry.
I bet you wish you hadn't asked to be last, John.
Sort of. I'm running out of questions, Linda. I'd like the, similar to what Patrice is talking about, I like the PowerPoint, the gradient that you
Yes.
and I'm wondering if you were to focus on people in leadership positions, where, and not that you weren't, not that the people you weren't interviewing were leaders in their own right, but for the purpose of what you're getting your degree in, I'm wondering where would these people, where do you think they would sit, and how does it basically apply to leadership? Like where would these people sit on that gradient? Where would your participants sit?
Wow, it's a very compelling commentary. I don't know how to write that down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Brunier.
I had another question, but it was, we've kind of dealt with it, so I can pass. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. O'Neill.
Just one more, Bob.
Okay.
And it's just, and I'm not in methodology. I never do methodology on the third question. Bob, just to, because I just wondered this piece, because you've explained all of this so beautifully. Like, you have a great line in your thesis that you suggest that the results left you. And I think us as readers, with that experience of awe, wonder, and further reflection, I know we don't have a lot of time because you could speak on that for probably 2 days. But if you could just share with us your experience of that awe, wonder, and further reflection, and how that might move you on as you have mentioned a PhD.
The very fact that how should I put it? The very fact that I'm even considering the possibility of a PhD, I mean, I have a few conditions, but that I'm considering that is an indication that I have been struck by the awe and possibility of what's available for research, and that the university environment provides an opportunity to go there rather than an impediment. I think that the unfolding of my thesis with such incredible ease, I'm blown away by that. I don't know if that's synchronicity, but the coming of the topic, how the topic came, how the participants came, how my committee came. I mean, there's a story with each of those. I mean, one of my participants, the name of one of my participants is a very unusual name and is almost identical to the name of my sister-in-law. I mean, I could go on with the numbers of synchronistic events that are connected to my study and my research. How the participants came, the depth of the interview, why I only worked with 4 participants instead of 6 or 8 or 12, and the depth at which the interviews went. It's like, it just goes on. The literature review that I've mentioned, the possibility, I mean, I'm almost on an ongoing literature review, you know, of one topic or another. It's like, I don't need a thesis to be doing a literature review. I'm reading all these articles. I spent 20 years without reading a book, without reading anything. And I'm getting excited about some of the things I can discover now again. And so I'm waiting for the synchronicity, if you wish, to unfold the next steps for me, if that's where I'm to go. I'm waiting for something to grab me, just like this topic grabbed me, just like the experiential course I did with Jeff grabbed me and led me to the leadership one, and to, you know, I'm preparing to present at Royal Roads in the fall on leadership on this very topic at a conference there on leadership. Just to allow these things to unfold and come forth, and not hold a ceiling like I did in the past. Because when I was working on my year of preparation for master's in 1969, I was clearly intent on a career at the university level and teaching in philosophy. That's where I was going when I turned my back on it. So I'm saying I'm now open. I've taken that ceiling off myself, and I think that is one of the biggest impacts of this in terms of synchronicity. And that's how I'm going to continue moving forward.
Beautiful, Bob.
Okay, I have to agree with you, Bob, on the piece that there was a lot of synchronistic events as we were working together.
Yes, yes.
You'd often email me and you would say when you're in Terrace and I'd already be here and randomly doing a workshop, or you'd send me something about New York and ask me a question. I'd be in New York. I thought you had a webcam follow me around. We're in front of the bathroom, you know. It was a little bizarre at times, but it's been a fascinating journey with you. I really enjoyed this, and I'm just curious, what would you like us all to leave with, you know, in reflecting on the presentation? What would you like us to take from this and leave with today?
I think if there's one thing that I may be leading up to without even thinking about it, without having a cause there, Jeff. Jeff and I have this ongoing conversation, is to maintain the degree of wonder that synchronicity triggers for us, right? that we had as children, and to keep going, and to keep open to possibilities. I find that if the Western world thinking has done anything to this day, has been to reduce our thinking in terms of what's possible. And I think if we can expand that, what's possible today, what's possible in what I'm going to do, then I think we're leaning more back to the human element rather than the mechanistic element.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. Well, I mean, it's a very intriguing subject. I mean, I think that I, in fact, have dozens of questions, but I'll wait for another time for that. But as an elected official and somebody who's aspiring to go into an election in a couple of weeks, how could I include principles of synchronicity in terms of my particular style of leadership? What would that look like in terms of me making a speech or trying to motivate people or to organize people?
Okay. I'll give you one example. In this presentation that I've given already on leadership, there's in the very few beginning slides, I have a slide which has a path going in two directions. Right? So you have the option of doing it like you may have always done it. I'm not presuming that, but that where you figure out exactly what you say, you cover all your points, and you know, if you have a PowerPoint, you go through every slide and you cover every PowerPoint slide, right? The other way is you get to a point and you turn the projector off. You stop everything and you see what is in the space that wants to come forward in the space at that time. Now you've opened it to the unknown and the unexpected, and you've let go of control. I'm not being personal. I hope you don't see that. I'm really trying to just give you an example of the two different approaches. And what will happen is that what is calling to emerge is there. It's sitting. It's present. And it's what serves the general direction of where we're going. That's the person. And you've got synchronicity happening, right? I was running a few talking circles at the college, and in a few instances, people were at this talking circle connected through what something said from years ago and reestablished connections. Why? Because the talking circle principle is simple. I don't have a PowerPoint. I don't do anything. I say, okay, we start. We'll go around, everybody talks. And out of that, something emerges. Right? So it's about being willing to see that there is a greater principle at work. And I am not a proponent of religion in this sense. It's more of the implicate order of David Bohm that has some kind of consciousness that is wanting to come forward. And a good example I used to use about that fits this well is the example of these people these guys on a lifeboat with a young boy, and the elders are all together discussing what they're going to do, and the young boy is saying, hey, you know, and they say, no, sit down, you know, be quiet, we're serious here, we're doing this. And the little boy sees a boat going by, right? So in other words, our salvation may lie in the young, may lie in the person that we would say, what do you have to contribute to this environment? They may contain the peace that will lead us where we need to go. And I think as a leader, we're a facilitator of that.
I'm just trying to envision me standing in front of several hundred delegates sitting there saying, well, Bob said. I should just allow it to flow through me. It's a remarkable challenge, and thank you for that offering. I'm cognizant of the time. We will entertain a couple of questions from the audience. I will allocate about 5 minutes to that, so if people can try to keep it focused, and there's obviously an opportunity to ask Bob questions after the deliberation. So, Dr. McDonald.
This one is short. I think we saw yesterday what Bob is talking about through Marion, who organized a community gathering where the clear intention and focus was to listen. And some information was presented first, and then there was a real listening, and even in a really short period of time, this was an hour and a few minutes, to what people really wanted to bring to that question. And then later there was an hour of discussion with individuals. Bob, do you think that the beginning emergence of that intention with the folks who are so tired of fighting the fight,
Yes.
and it started to spark them with that same maybe the university does have something to contribute here, and it hadn't up to that point for that big group of folks. And my question to you is, in the invitation to participate in that synchronicity and that possibility, is there just as much likelihood that the impact will happen when we don't see it, when we don't know about it at some other point, and does that matter?
I think all of those points are crucial. That we've got to let go of our pictures, our images of what we see as the expected outcome of all the dominoes that we have in line. And if we let that go, something can emerge with coffee after, something can emerge 2-3 people later will find themselves together at Tim Hortons or whatever, and something will emerge there, or even in the pub, I don't know. But it's like things will emerge. Someone will send an email, something is that we have to allow the unexpected to come and bring us what we need, right? There's the story about how on this reserve there was this communal building that had a bad roof that needed to be fixed, and nobody was organizing it to get it fixed until one guy suddenly decided, I'm going to go work on it. He started working on it. Some other person showed up, right? There was no plan. There was no plan, right? And it's in the same way. The elder I walked with was part of AIM, the American Indian Movement, right? And in the heat of 1973 with the Wounded Knee, right? How they worked with the, what do you call it? Not infiltrators, but the AIM movement. I guess that's what you would call it. The FBI they were trying to plant people into the movement. How they worked with it is that they could never go back and say when the next meeting was. They never set a date. They never set a place. They all congregated at the same place, at the same time, when it was time. I mean, I'm giving you a possibility of where we could go. You don't have to go there with your meeting. But these are possibilities that are there for us as human beings with our consciousness.
So being open to the experience that might not unfold otherwise.
That's correct.
I think that I should turn the last question over to Maggie. If you ever had an opportunity to ask a parent a question which they're obligated to answer, feel free.
You know what? No. I grew up my entire life with synchronicity unknowingly affecting it. And you know what the best example is my dad actually coming into my sister and my mom and I's life. It was unplanned. My mom, my dad had known each other for 7 years beforehand, never had the thought of getting together, and my mom got pregnant, and that was me, and which was unplanned, and my dad just knew, and for the rest of my life has been completely changed. I would have had a different life, but I'm so thankful to my dad for the universe just coming together and taking care of my sister and my mom and I through a tough time, and just so happy, and the one man that my grandma loved, you know, and it was, I don't have a question for my dad because my dad has always been honest and always been open and always been helpful, and I'm just so proud of him.
I'm tremendously glad I asked the question. What a wonderful wrap-up. Thank you. Now the opportunity for summing comment. Concluding comment, if you'd like.
No, I think the possibility of what to focus on, I think that's a good one. And I want to thank you. I think, yes, I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to thank, you know, Linda, Jeff, and Patrice. I would love to get to know you more one day.
Certainly, Bob.
Yeah. And John, as John said in the number of times, the man is just, he works so hard, and so does Linda, that I would call him and he'd be in New York. Right? And he'd go to a coffee shop and he would handle all the interaction with the Research Ethics Board and with everything, even though he was there on holiday or on doing something else. So that kind of devotion. I didn't mention that the one thing also that I've gained that has impacted me through all of this are the relationships. And I'm thinking of Deidre coming in one day and recommending book, Read Me First on Qualitative Research by Janice Morse, right? Which saved my butt. right? It set everything in motion. So it's those relationships I'm very grateful for. Thank you, and thank you for taking care of today, Bruce. I appreciate it.
I will ask the members of the audience now to please adjourn, and the committee will deliberate in terms of the outcome of this particular presentation. We should only be a few minutes.
There's coffee and goodies and
In
down the hall.
107.
Congratulations. I'm really moved. Any other comments? I think there's cake and things to be served in the next room. Well, Bob, it's quite an accomplishment. It's fairly uncommon to get a clear path without any sort of recommended revision, so you should be very proud. And with that, I will say that this meeting is adjourned. And thank you very much to all our external members on the phone, and you will be forwarded the paperwork shortly. Thank you.
Congratulations, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Patrice.
Bye, Jeff. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
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 See you later, Patrice.
Bye.
Bye, thank you, bye.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thank you,
What a
everyone.
great wrap.
You can stay for food. There's some in 107.
You're faster now.
Master.
Holy cow. I am.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Thanks for doing that. Great
Yeah,
chance.
it's been a journey to get here.
Like I said,
Been with
the order of questions, laugh, and then.
I mean, I was so hurt doing it. I knew it was a
Did you work here for
I had so many questions for you. I was just like, I'm trying to get my head. I had so many university. Wow. On the other end of the phone, because they have to narrow it down to just one question, you know? Wow.
Just about bringing change from within is what I was trying to say, without giving up.
Really? Wow. So, because it's not a well-researched topic, it would be
Making my last trip out of town on Thursday.
Oh, okay.
I'll be home for tomorrow. Really? Oh, yeah. I will. Absolutely. I know. That was
I have been asked to now I'm free.
well, free to move forward, move on, and take this to the next step. That was a shock to hear those words, you know, the possibility, you know.
I thought that would have been kind of cool.
Thanks again for doing this.
And Mildred when the time comes. So I think that we're celebrating in the other room over here. I won't take up all your time.
No, that's okay.
A lot of people want to see you too.
Thank you again for coming.